Hey guys, welcome to the Animation Movies Recapped. This is David with you. In today's video, I am going to recap a 2006 animated adventure film called Curious George. I really enjoyed the movie very much and hope you will like it too. So without wasting any more time, let's start with the recap. In a jungle in Africa, there was a monkey named George. George is a very playful and curious little monkey who spends most of his time playing with other animals and experimenting with his curiosity. Far away from Africa, in New York City, there lives a museum tour guide whose name is Ted. At the beginning of the movie, he is teaching a group of schoolchildren who are on another one of their weekly visits to the museum. These kids find his teaching uninteresting, and some of them tell this to their coordinator, whose name is Maggie, but she doesn't feel the same way because she has a secret crush on Ted. After some time, the children run to the museum's cafeteria to have lunch. After the children have left, Ted is approached by Mr. Bloomsbury, who owns the museum. Mr. Bloomsbury sadly tells Ted that he intends to sell the museum due to the low attendance of tourists. He says that the exhibits in the museum do not bring a crowd like they used to. In his office, Ted meets Mr. Bloomsbury's son, who informs him that they have received an offer to turn the museum into a parking lot. Ted isn't happy about this news, so he asks his boss to give it a second thought and suggests that the museum put up an outstanding new exhibit to attract the attention and the crowd. Mr. Bloomsbury's son isn't buying any idea from Ted. He tells him to go and start searching for a new job. They ask Ted to recommend new exhibitions which the museum could display, and he mentions to them that they should search for the lost shrine of Zagawa. According to Ted, they should find the idol and bring it to the museum as an exhibit. Mr. Bloomsbury is happy about this suggestion and reveals that the shrine of Zagawa is an ancient idol, crafted by 1,000 craftsmen for over 100 years. Years back, he had planned to go on an adventure to search for it, but could not due to the birth of his only son. Mr. Bloomsbury tells Ted that he is too old to go on any more expeditions, and Ted volunteers to go on an adventure to Africa to find it. Although Ted has never been on an adventure before, Mr. Bloomsbury provides a journal that would enable him to locate the idol easily. Together, they head out of the office, leaving Mr. Bloomsbury's son in the office. His son, jealous that his father didn't accept his suggestion, tears out a page from the journal that leads to the idol. Ted gets all that he needs for the adventure, and on the next day, boards a ship heading to Africa. On the ship, some crew members laugh at Ted and his weird-looking expedition outfit. Arriving in Africa, he and his team head into the jungle in Zagawa searching for the lost shrine. In the jungle, Ted is with his tour guide and some other men. They follow the direction that Mr. Bloomsbury's book provides in finding the lost shrine. The team comes across a rock that they mistake for a rhinoceros, and Ted shoots tranquilizers at it. The shot boomerangs and hits the tour guide, making him fall into a deep sleep. So, they decide to take a break until the drug wears off the man. It is in this jungle that Ted meets George. George sits on a tree and is about to eat his banana when Ted's hat draws his attention. He thinks it is a bigger banana, so as the curious monkey that George is, he goes to check it out. He grabs Ted's hat while he is having a snack and runs back up the tree. The monkey soon realizes that the hat isn't edible as he thought, so he comes down the tree with it. He plays peekaboo with Ted, who playfully engages him. After a while, Ted asks for his hat and runs around with George so he can retrieve it. After some scuffle over some time, George hands Ted's hat back to him. Ted resumes the search with his crew, and according to the journal, they are close to finding the ancient artifact. The map leads Ted to a location where he uses binoculars to search, and he discovers a doll-sized replica of the idol of Zagawa. Ted is confused and disappointed, as he was expecting a gigantic figure. Disheartened, he places a call to Mr. Bloomsbury informing him about what he found and also sending a picture of it to him. On the other end, the picture that Ted sends does not reflect the true size of the object that Ted found. The picture was a zoomed-in photo, making it look big to Mr. Bloomsbury. In his office, he is elated that the shrine of Zagawa has been discovered and is on its way to his museum. Ted is frustrated at the complete waste of effort. He is so disappointed to go back to the museum without the exact idol that he went on an adventure for. George grabs his hat again in an attempt to play, but Ted doesn't try to get his hat back. Instead, he leaves it as a gift to George. Ted gets into a tour vehicle, drives away from the jungle, and heads to the ship that would take him back home. Unknown to Ted, George is following him from behind. The little monkey swings after the vehicle and boards the same ship as Ted. He also brings the hat along with him. George stays in the cargo area of the ship. The ship arrives at their destination and Ted boards a taxi to his house. George goes after the taxi but misses his way as a result of how busy the city is. He jumps from vehicle to vehicle and some of the people who see him get scared, and which results in a traffic congestion. George gets a little frightened by the moving vehicles everywhere on the road, so he runs up to a spot to stay. While looking across the road, he sees Ted coming out from the taxi, so he excitedly runs across the road, climbing rooftops and houses towards him. Ted arrives at his apartment feeling exhausted, so he collapses into his sofa. Some seconds later, he gets a call from Mr. Bloomsbury, who informs him to head to the museum. He tells him that the press is waiting to interview him regarding his last adventure. Banners have been put up announcing the discovery of the Shrine of Zagawa, and a date for the exhibition has been fixed. Ted attempts to start explaining to Mr. Bloomsbury about the object he found in the jungle, but he is interrupted at the sight of his hat. He is surprised to see the hat in his apartment because he remembers leaving it behind in the jungle. George appears from under the hat and Ted is surprised that George followed him from Africa. This cute reunion is halted by the arrival of the building's security, who suspects that there is an animal in Ted's apartment. He searches the apartment for pets because the building has a no-pet policy. George hides from the man, and Ted also tries his best to make sure that the monkey doesn't blow its cover. Fortunately, the man doesn't find any pets in his house, but before he leaves, he warns Ted that he would be evicted if he is found with any pets in the building. George gets into Ted's neighbor's apartment, sees some cans of paint, and out of curiosity, he dips his hands and feet into the paint, smearing paint everywhere in the apartment. The owner sees this and raises an alarm, causing the security man to arrive and chase Ted and George outside the building. Together, they arrive at the museum. Ted sneaks into the museum and sees that Mr. Bloomsbury has souvenirs arranged for the upcoming exhibition. He and George run into hiding, and Ted complains about how the artifact he found wouldn't meet the expectations of the audience. The people are expecting a gigantic exhibit, but what Ted has is a tiny object whose size cannot be compared to the ancient idol of Zagawa. Unknown to Ted, Mr. Bloomsbury's jealous son overheard him speaking, so he eavesdrops on the entire conversation. He is happy that Ted did not make any discovery because it means that the plan to transform the museum into a parking lot is already in motion. Ted finally comes out of his hiding and tells Mr. Bloomsbury the entire truth. He also shows him the object that he saw in the jungle. Their conversation is interrupted by the entrance of representatives of different news media. They are ushered in by Mr. Bloomsbury's son, who plans to publicly ridicule Ted. The reporters begin to ask questions about the Shrine of Zagawa. Ted is speechless and he has no idea what to do. George, on the other hand, is curiously climbing a fragile exhibit. Ted sees this and runs through the group of reporters to prevent the monkey from destroying the exhibit. Regardless of his efforts, the exhibit is destroyed, leaving Ted on the floor with a pack of bones. Ted is sent out of the museum by his boss's son. Outside the museum, Ted frustratingly contacts Animal Control, informing them about George and requesting them to come to take him. It's nighttime. Ted and George are feeling tired and sleepy, so they look for where to rest for the night. It starts raining, so George uses leaves to make a comfortable resting space for both of them under a tree. The tree provides them with enough shade, and after the rain stops, Ted and George watch the stars together for some time, after which they fall asleep. Ted wakes up the next morning and doesn't find George next to him. He goes into the zoo across the park to search for the little monkey. Ted later finds him playing with a group of kids. A few moments later, the kids alert Ted that George is in trouble. George is seen floating away in the air as a result of the balloons he's holding. Ted hastens to rescue him, taking as many balloons as he can. Finally, he rescues George from falling, and they float together in the sky. While in the air, Ted gets an idea on how to make the miniature artifact look big, so goes to make this idea work. Ted and George arrive at an engineer's workshop, and after going through many options, they decide to use a holographic image for the exhibition. Mr. Clodes, the engineer, gives Ted his hologram machine and also lends him his car. Ted drives with the machine towards the museum. On his way, he places a call to Mr. Bloomsbury and informs him that he has found a solution to their problem. Curious George plays with the machine and tries it out, and this causes a lot of chaos and traffic congestion on their way to the museum. Ted finally arrives at the museum. He runs happily into the museum, so excited to show his discovery to Mr. Bloomsbury. Ted meets him with his son and puts the hologram machine to work in their presence. Mr. Bloomsbury's son is secretly upset that the plan for the exhibition is going as well. So, when no one is looking, he pours coffee into the machine and hands the remaining to George. Some seconds later, the machine stops working and blows up. They turn and see George with a cup of latte and immediately put the blame on him. Mr. Bloomsbury is downtrodden this time, so he instructs Ted to completely forget about the exhibition or save the museum, and he walks away with his son. Ted heads outside the museum where the people are waiting to see the exhibition. He announces to them that the museum has been closed down forever, and when he is asked about the giant idol, he sadly tells them that there isn't any and that it was all a mistake. The crowd is disappointed, and they slowly begin to disperse. After everyone has left, Ted sits at the entrance of the museum. George tries to play a little to cheer him up but gets shunned. Ted mentions to him that they aren't meant to be together and that he belongs in the jungle. What Ted says upsets George, and it makes him sad. Ted turns away from George, walking away when he hears a sound. He turns back and sees two animal control workers trying to take George captive. George cries for help and runs to Ted, but he doesn't help him. Soon, he is overpowered and put in a cage in a vehicle, and they drive off. They are taking him to a ship headed to Africa. As the vehicle drives off, Ted tells himself that it is for the best. It doesn't take long, and Ted begins to miss George. He wanders the streets thinking about the memories they shared. Along the road, he meets his lady friend Maggie and tells her that he feels guilty about what happened to George. After some advice from her, Ted decides to go after his friend. He drives to the bay, but the ship has already started sailing. So, he drives the vehicle at a high speed towards the ship. He lands on the wrong ship at first but later gets inside the cargo ship where George is. Ted enters the cargo area and calls for George repeatedly. George hears him and calls out to him from his cage. Ted finally sees him and breaks the lock of the cage. George jumps out and holds Ted in a warm hug. It's a beautiful reunion as they hold themselves in an embrace for some time. Ted apologizes to George for allowing animal control to take him away. During his apology, Ted brings out the little idol from his pockets and places it outside. As he does this, the sun shines through the object, and it projects a picture on the floor, which George draws Ted's attention to. Ted realizes that the pictogram is a map of where the Shrine of Zagawa is located. Ted is so excited about this, so they both sit and wait for the ship to arrive in Africa. In the jungle, Ted and George both look for the Shrine of Zagawa using the map that the little artifact provides. After some time in the jungle, they finally find the ancient idol covered in leaves. So, Ted and his team head down to the shrine to it out. The museum is reopened, and a date for the exhibition fixed. So many people arrive at the museum on the exhibition day to witness the unveiling of the lost Shrine of Zagawa. The people are amazed by how enormous it is and applaud Ted for his efforts. Ted gives a speech after the unveiling of the ancient idol. In his speech, he declares the museum open to everyone to explore and learn from. The museum is filled with happiness and laughter, and the children and adults are having so much fun. Amidst all of this, George enters into a rocket displayed at the exhibition and ignites it. The children inform Ted about this, and he hastens into the rocket to prevent George from doing any other thing that would be harmful to him. He gets into the rocket and together they both fly into space. The end. If you love this video, please leave a like and subscribe.